All right. Thanks to everyone for being here today. Today, we're going to be talking about different complex digestive issues because we can kind of get into it because we have a real expert on here today who is Nicole DiNezza.
DiNezza.
She's a specialist in treating IBS and SIBO, and there's going to be some related conditions that we'll talk about. We'll talk about the microbiome, FODMAP foods, which may be bothering you without you realizing it, but then how to reintroduce them again and have a more, it sounds like, Nicole, your goal is similar to mine, like have a more diverse diet in the long run than a restrictive one. So you're a chiropractic physician and a functional nutritional therapy practitioner. You do a lot of healing with food. I see from your site you also do some testing. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, I do, functional medicine or integrated medicine, whatever you want to call it, but that does usually entail some testing.
Yeah. What are your preferred tests?
Depends what for.
Okay.
Are we talking immune system, gut, metabolism?
Let's talk about gut. Let's focus on gut.
Yeah, that's something I've been exploring more recently. There's about a gajillion stool tests on the market, and some of them are great, and some of them are shit, pun intended. I ran a lot of GI maps for a couple of years, and I've started to fall out of love with the GI map. Nowadays, there's a couple of stool tests I'll use for a more complete picture. There's one called Thrive that you can actually just order online.
Okay.
You don't need a doctor's order for that. That one's pretty decent. It just doesn't look at pathogens and it doesn't look at candida. There's other ones if I'm looking for pathogens.
Gotcha. Okay. I know Microbiome Labs is really pushing me to use their tests, but it's still pretty new. I'm thinking to kind of let them work out the kinks. Yeah.
Yeah, there's pros and cons to that one, certainly. That's one of the ones that I've explored more recently, and I really wanted to love it, and I ended up just kind of liking it. I did a whole YouTube video about the breakdown of that and where some of the results made sense and some of them did not make sense.
Oh, cool. Maybe I can find that link and share it later with the recording. Yeah. Awesome. Well, you sent me some questions, but I kind of want to go a little bit rogue. So you're a digestion expert, it's a pretty great thing. I wondered if you could kind of just tell us like your philosophy of the gut. Is that too tough of a question?
That's a big, broad question.
Or when you go about treating the gut, like what are kind of your road markers or how do you go about it?
Well, I guess I'll start with this, is that I think that many, many, many more people in the developed world have problems with the good bacteria not being high enough or adequate enough, and a relatively fewer group of people. Did that make sense? Fewer people? Anyway, fewer people have problems with an overgrowth of bad stuff, and that would encompass parasites, candida, bad bacteria, SIBO, which is the quintessential, bugs in the wrong place. It's not necessarily that you have bad bacteria, but they are in the wrong part of the tube. A lot of people think that they have problems with too many bad things, whether it be candida, parasites, SIBO. And then a lot of the time we end up working on feeding the good guys more than people would otherwise suspect.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know. And it sounds like from your bio that, which I didn't totally read, sort of all over the place today, that you yourself had some issues with restrictive diets and like not going to be able to rest. So tell us your story and your journey.
Yeah, well, I think it started really early on, but I'll spare you all the details. So I was a child of the 1980s. And I had about 87 humans worth of antibiotics in my lifetime. And I think I just depleted all the good guys for years and years and years. And it wasn't until I started studying functional medicine that I realized how big of a problem that is and where my immune system's at and why I probably developed some autoimmunity. And, in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been focusing much more on my own gut health. And part of that was when I started studying functional medicine and I started cleaning up my diet and trying to do detoxes and care more about my health, my gut was a train wreck. I had what could have been labeled as IBS, a lot of bloating, a lot of abdominal pain, chronic loose stools, and I found myself whittling down my diet. We're like, all right, first I started by cutting out gluten and dairy. I found out I was celiac, so that made sense. And then, I did basically paleo. And then I went to autoimmune paleo before it was called autoimmune paleo. And then I restricted a little bit further and it just I thought that I was going to find that one magic food, right? Like,
Mm.
oh, it was eggplant all along. Oh my God. And then you cut that thing out and then miracles happen. But what ended up happening was that my gut got more unstable and more compromised. And I think my
Mm.
digestion just kind of tanked. And it wasn't until I started reintroducing some foods and working on, I did end up having candida and 2 parasites.
Mm.
So I was one of those people. But once I treated the microbial imbalance, healed the leaky gut, and reintroduced more foods, that's when I saw more of the profound shifts in my health. But there was
Okay.
probably a good 2 years that I was caught up in that, like, restrict, restrict, restrict mentality of
Right.
nutrition, and it was a pretty bad place to be.
Okay. So to recap a bit, you were trying to be healthier and eating more diverse foods, but then getting bloated and not feeling good from it, and then restricted. So if you knew then what you know now, would you say you didn't have the right bacteria to break down those fibrous foods, or what?
I think a good part of it was stress, honestly.
Okay.
This was when I was in grad school, and I had a little bit more stress than normal in my life. I had a kind of a crazy roommate that I tolerated for far too long. And I think a lot of it was that stress was wrecking my gut brain axis, wrecking my vagus nerve, and I just wasn't digesting worth a damn.
Mm.
I do think the parasites played a role, I would assume. Um, and certainly treating that was helpful for me. So I think it was a combination of like microbial imbalance. I know from years and years of testing now that if I'm not taking a probiotic and if I'm not really being intentional with feeding the good bacteria, that my bifido and my lacto tend to be in the toilet, pun intended, or metaphor intended.
Okay.
So I think it was a combination. I think I didn't have enough good guys. I certainly had
Okay.
something pathogenic. And
Okay.
also, I think that stress was wrecking my gut way more than I could comprehend at the time.
Mm. Yeah, I think the stress is a good piece because when we're getting on the health path, we can obsess about our diet, and then there's like this elephant in the room of, you know, your your schooling or your roommate or whatever is going on. That it does really, stress your gut because you want to be in what they call it feed and breed, and instead you're in fight or
Mm-hmm.
flight, so you're just not digesting. When I look at mucosa levels, which for me and my clients seems to be at least 90% of the time low. I know I've seen some studies on that mucosal health and stress, and I often tell people when I really believe, I know it can be from pathogens and other things, but I'm like, let's also work on just creating like a safe space in your body that is allowed to flourish. So I think
Yeah.
it's a great idea.
Yeah. Kind of give
Okay.
yourself the space to break down your food.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So you probably treat people who are in the space you were once upon a time on restricted diets, can't figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, And you said earlier that you think that a lack of good bacteria is a more common problem than we realize, or the
Yeah.
more predominant problem. In your opinion, do you need to sort of kill first and then rebuild, or is it sort of all mixed together, or sometimes you don't need to kill pathogens at all?
Yeah. And you don't always have to kill stuff. And
Yeah.
that goes for SIBO too. A lot of people are surprised to hear that because SIBO, for those of you who don't know, that stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And like I said, it's the quintessential bugs in the wrong place. So rather than having the bulk of your microbiome be in the colon, you now have a flourishing of some bacteria, most often in the small bowel, where they frankly don't belong. So with SIBO, in the conventional space and in the integrative space, most often people treat it like an infection. You go in and you obliterate it with oregano, or you obliterate it with, uva ursi or rifaximin, whatever it may be. You go in and you nuke the suckers. But that doesn't always need to be the case. If you really get that gut brain axis going, if you get
Mm.
motility going, if you treat SIBO from the top down, the head down, oftentimes you need very little antimicrobial support. So, before I really was as keen on the gut brain axis stuff and working at it from that angle, I would find that people very frequently would need 4 to 6 months of antimicrobial therapy for SIBO. Now, we're kind of getting those dominoes in place first. We're getting that foundation first. and then we're starting some antimicrobials. And I'm finding that most people need 0, 1, or 2 months of antimicrobials.
That's
So
fantastic. That's really good information.
Profoundly different.
Yeah, I think like certain theories are tried and then sort of everybody is kind of hearing about that for some time afterwards. And they're like, oh, this is the way to do it. But yeah, probably because we both study with Dr. Karazian. I have a gut guide called Top Down Digestive Guide, you know, because that's really how he teaches too. Like, check, is the brain working? Are you making saliva? Are you able to chew?
Yep.
And it's so true. And people don't really think about that too much. I recently hit my head, which everyone's having me hear about. And it was amazing how stagnant my digestion became, just kind of food sitting in my stomach, nauseous all the time.
Yep.
So it really showed me, okay, yeah, like that's a real thing. And I know that from his work too, that you can develop conditions really quickly in the gut from a head injury. And but I luckily knew a lot of support to do and all that pretty quickly. But that's it. Really interesting to know about SIBO. You also deal with histamines, which is definitely not a specialty of mine, but I have clients who come in working on it, and you know, I'm interested in learning more. So how do you think that histamine abundance or intolerance, or however you want to define it, begins?
I think there's 2 variants, to be really broad about a complex topic. I think that a lot of the cases of histamine intolerance are secondary to something else, like SIBO or dysbiosis or a parasite. There's something stimulating the immune system to produce more histamine, or it's beating up the gut enough that you don't have the enzyme to break down dietary histamine, right? If you have leaky gut, you're not going to break down histamine appropriately.
Okay.
So I think a lot of cases, more of them, are secondary to something else. You just have to find that something else and treat it effectively.
Okay.
Sometimes I think there is more of a hard ingrained genetic quirk. Like, we all have our quirks, right? Like, you're not going to develop celiac disease without the celiac genes, for example. So that's just like something you're going to be a little bit more prone to, and a road that's open to you on the path of life. Similarly, I do see some people who, you know, when we're going over their family history and their history, I'm looking through their intake forms and I'm seeing, oh, chronic hives. Oh, they had eczema as a kid. They had asthma as a kid. They have all these allergic things. And then I ask them about family history and they say, oh yeah, my brother has asthma and eczema. My mom has hives all the time. My dad has this. And I've had patients who is like, you know, they're one of 4 children and all 6 people in their immediate family have some sort of allergic thing. An anaphylactic food allergy, a peanut allergy, hives, eczema, whatever the case may be. And those are the cases where I'm like, okay, there might be either you're all getting exposed to mold in the home, you're right, a shared environmental experience, or this is a little bit of a quirk of genetics of like, you maybe had a mom and a dad who were a little bit more prone to allergic stuff, and then they had kids that are more prone to allergic stuff. And of course, you still need the dysbiosis or the toxins or the infections or something else to fully nudge you in that direction. But maybe you're just like a bit more prone than other people. So I think environment and genetics both play a role, but I'm usually more keen to focus on the environment whenever I can, because honestly, that's the thing we're able to treat. We're not able to treat genetics. So we can observe it and I can tell them, hey, FYI, this is something you might need to be mindful of indefinitely. Or maybe we need to pursue more advanced testing for mast cell disease. But beyond that, like, we're always going to go back to the root causes and the triggers and the things in their environment anyway.
Yeah, I became really interested in genetics for like a hot minute. And then it's just like, in the end, you're treating it like the same kind of. I mean, I know you can get really specific with matching supplements with SNPs and all that, but it was just like, it's sort of like do what we know to do at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah. You also work with some autoimmunity, and probably from work of Dr. Karazian and a lot of other functional kind of leaders in the space, I think people pretty well know that gut is related to autoimmunity now. So I was curious, in your practice, do you often see, the gut is healing and antibodies just come down, or is it more complex than that? You have to treat lots of things, or sometimes it's too far gone, or what?
It depends on the case. It depends on the person.
Yeah.
Very frequently, yes, if we treat the gut, I will observe that antibodies come down.
Okay.
Then there's some other cases where it turns out they have another infection or mold, or they're getting totally crappy sleep, or they're stressed more than they're willing to initially talk about.
Yeah.
There could be other triggers, but certainly for a lot of people, one of the triggers is the gut.
Okay. That's fair. That makes sense. So if people are listening, and again, you're welcome to put questions in the chat, and they're thinking, well, I have food intolerances, or I have a limited diet, or I suspect I have a histamine issue. Are there some like kind of global recommendations that you can share?
Yeah, I think nutritionally, I always try to get people to the most diverse diet that they can tolerate. And that has an asterisk next to it, right? Because the most diverse diet you can tolerate today might be different than 5 years from now, and that might be different from 5 years ago. But always having that mindset of like wanting to dip your toe in the water and wanting to try some stuff every now and then to just check back in with yourself. Whether it's that you had to restrict the high FODMAP foods because of IBS, or you've been on a low histamine diet for a period of time for migraines, every now and then just try a little bit of a food that you suspect might be triggering, because you might be pleasantly surprised and see that it's no problem.
Okay.
So that's one kind of overarching theme, is that diversity is going to keep your gut and your immune system happy and healthy, and therefore it's going to keep your inflammation at a minimum. So whatever you can do to try to get a more diverse diet is going to be helpful in the long run.
Okay. And you said having a diverse gut health helps for inflammation, which is just, I think, a great thing to hear and really like sink in, because I think we want a quick fix for inflammation when we're feeling it. But this is like laying the foundation is this. Okay, awesome. Any other global tips you want to share?
Just to go back to your point, is that inflammation very much is affected by the gut. Again, not exclusively, it could be related to something else in your environment or your life, but I've seen profound shifts in inflammatory markers with gut healing efforts, whether that be purely nutritional or something supplemental or herbal. I've seen really profound shifts, and inflammation, if treated appropriately, can shift very quickly, depending on the nature of the inflammation. But keep in mind that most inflammation, at least in the context of what we talk about, is created by the immune system. It's your immune system being perturbed or imbalanced or hypervigilant, in that it's making chemicals to signal other immune cells to come on over and help with the battle. And it's those inflammatory chemicals that really provoke, I don't know what that word was supposed to be, provoke, perhaps, provoke the systemic inflammatory response, and you get things like, redness and puffiness and fatigue and brain fog and the symptoms that we associate with it. But if inflammation is largely made by the immune system, and 70% of the immune system lives in the gut, it makes sense that about 70% of your inflammatory response, plus or minus, could come directly from the gut. So
yeah, that's a great point. I just did a bunch of research on the lymphatic system, and you may already know this, but it responds to inflammation in a positive way when it's acute inflammation, but with chronic inflammation that it's keep having to deal with, it's having to change its vasculature, and sometimes that's not a good thing. It's just the body's way of dealing with a problem, but then that can help kind of cancer spread through the lymphatic system and stuff. So that's good to know, like something like chronic foot pain or whatever, you can actually now also work on the gut. Because I think still in this culture, we feel like that's, you go to the doctor and you get put on painkillers for that and that kind of a thing. So it's a slippery. So, Trudy had a question.
It is.
Are thyroid antibodies treatable, and what is a starting point to do that? Was her question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell a story, if I may, to make the point. So this woman came in to see me. She had driven down from Virginia, and she said, look, I already went to a functional MD. I don't know what else you could do for me, but I keep getting worse. She had the Hashimoto's antibodies. She wasn't to a point where she needed thyroid hormone medication yet, but she said, every time we test, my antibodies keep going up. And I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. It's going to get worse. Oh, and she was a nurse, so like she kind of had an understanding of the gravity of the situation. And it turned out that one of the things that this integrative MD did, he ran some stool testing and saw what looked to be an overgrown bacteria and gave her prescription antibiotics, not once, not twice, but 3 times. So he was treating dysbiosis, supposedly,
antibiotics
with antibiotics.
Was this a functional person?
It was an IFM trained MD. That's all I will say. So he claimed to do functional medicine or do integrative medicine, but in my opinion, it wasn't super functional, but that's neither here nor there. So he gave her 3 rounds of prescription antibiotics, and her diversity per the stool test, her diversity kept going down and down and down. This particular bacteria he was trying to treat never really changed. It remained high. And her antibodies, every time they rechecked, kept going up, 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 up. So she came to me and it was really frustrating. Oh, and all the while too, he had taken her from a normal-ish diet, like reasonably healthy. She was a nurse, right? So reasonably healthy, normal-ish diet to paleo, to AIP, and they were starting to go more of like the AIP kind of keto kind of way. So it was restrictive, restrictive, restrictive. And meanwhile, they're scratching their heads saying, gosh, golly gee, why is your diversity going down? Like, because you're killing all the microbes.
It's tough because I think you're coming from one completely different theory of medicine and trying to add on a new one, and it's messy, and you want to use those tools you have, like antibiotics. I'm just going to put my editorial on this, that sometimes the price tag of your practitioner is not the most important part, because often those practitioners, $1,000 your first session or whatever. And somebody who's just like, I have a close friend who's just a trained coach. Like, he doesn't have any certification. Like, he's amazing. So sometimes it's not, it's trying to smush 2 theories together. Like, that's where we came from, that, like that training was like the highest standard, and it still can be. I mean, not to knock on doctors, but if you want like the purest theory, sometimes you have to just work with people who are really immersed in that. Like yourself, you said you did this since the beginning of your practice.
Well, it's kind of almost the equivalent of like, you can, this is going to sound judgy, but I hope it doesn't come across judgy. You could start with a Mercedes-Benz, and then, okay, you need to replace the door, and you replace the door, I don't know why the wheels, I don't know. You replace one of the parts of the car with another Mercedes-Benz door. Or you could start with a Chevy, and bit by bit, you could try to like add on parts that are from a Mercedes-Benz. It's like, you could start with a conventional model in your head, and you could go through all of your schooling in a conventional training, thinking drugs and surgery, drugs and surgery, drugs and surgery. And then it's like you try to tack on, oh, by the way, the gut matters. Or, oh, by the way, gluten is bad. Or, and you try to tack on integrative things. But I do find that with the conventionally trained folk, it doesn't always mesh together and stick, because they still have that foundation of a Chevy, or, whatever car brand you don't like. I don't know. So it doesn't always quite translate for them making the jump from a conventional setting to trying to do integrative medicine. It can be kind of a weird journey for them.
I'm sure. I don't mean to criticize, but if you've been just immersed in that thing, then, it's strange to add it. It kind of makes me think, I was an acupuncturist, and I also don't, have any shade to throw on that practice. But when I started to do functional medicine, I don't really integrate them. Like, I just was learning functional medicine, and maybe sometime in my career, I'll go back and write a book about how they're similar or whatever. But okay. So we have a few questions coming in. So
and to just go back to that really quickly too.
Sure.
Once we got that patient eating a more diverse diet, and we started feeding her good bacteria and not stressing about inhibiting the bad nearly as much, her antibodies have come down and down every time we rechecked. They were very, very close to being normal last time we checked. So I actually need to text her and tell her, hey, it's time to rerun the antibodies.
Yeah, and as you said before, there can be so great. There can be multiple causes, and maybe for this individual, it will just be increasing diversity. I had one client with thyroid antibodies super high, and she had lived like near Chernobyl when she was a kid, and it was just pretty darn tough to get that amount of toxicity out of the body. So we just had to kind of work with it. So every case is different. Yeah, Trudy, that's a good story. Thanks for asking. So I think you can see these, but I'll read them out loud for other people. So BL said, I have multiple chemical sensitivity from occupational exposure. I haven't been at work for 4.5 years, but I still get flare-ups like skin rashes on my face. I've tried to heal the gut, reduce toxic burden, improve liver detox function to no avail. I am about to go for a prescription to reduce the terrible itching at night. Any ideas? You think that's histamine-ish?
Maybe. I mean, that can be just a symptom of toxicity too. I wouldn't necessarily jump to histamine. Gosh, that's really tough. Admittedly, I've only attempted working with a couple of people with multiple chemical sensitivities, and I ended up referring each of them somewhere else. I didn't feel like we were making substantial strides, and I wanted to get them to somebody who knew more about working with that. I can find the info for the guy that I normally refer that sort of stuff to if you would like.
Okay.
But
reach out to you.
It's a little bit out of my wheelhouse.
So, BL, I would ask, like, did you get testing, and do you know which toxins they are and their levels, and do you flare up when you're exposed to something, or just kind of randomly, so to speak? Because I do think things can linger in the body. 4.5 years sounds like a long time, but things can linger if they're not cleared properly, even if you've been working on it. Sometimes I see that. So we'll see if he or she writes back. What Bob Parks asked, do you have anything to say about ubiquitous glyphosate problem regarding the gut and the use of binders to broom out detoxed stuff?
I don't know if I'm convinced that binders do much for glyphosate. I'd like to think they do. I just don't know. It's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And in the studies I've read, I mean, pesticides and herbicides generally kill stuff, but glyphosate in particular just nukes everything. I remember seeing a study where they looked at good bacteria like bifido and lactobacillus, and it just kills them. I don't know as far as getting the glyphosate out of your body. I think the best thing you could do is try to avoid it to whatever degree possible. I did see a study, or I got exposed to it at a conference, not related to glyphosate, but we can hypothesize if this translates. They were looking at a population in Africa who lived near a large lake that was very contaminated with mercury. And these people would eat the fish out of the mercury-laden lake, and they were getting a lot of mercury exposure. And what they tinkered with was trying out probiotics. And what they found was that the probiotics actually gobbled up some of the mercury in the gut so that it never got absorbed. So these people were eating the same mercury-laden fish from the same mercury-laden lake, but they were absorbing less of the mercury when they were taking probiotics. So then they actually went in and they taught the women in these villages how to make yogurt for very low cost so that everybody in that village could eat yogurt. Because, like, you're not going to tell the people, hey, don't eat the fish in the lake. Like, they've done that for how many years? And that's one of their big food sources. So instead, they went in and they taught these people how to make yogurt for very, very cheap so that they can at least get kind of the chelating, if you will, and the binding of it so that the mercury passes through them rather than being absorbed. I hypothesize something similar could happen with things like glyphosate. I don't think it's been researched, but if you're able to do that with mercury, I wouldn't see why not with another chemical.
Yeah, gut biotics can go after quite a few things, mold and chemicals and different bugs, but then glyphosate reduces that. But you can, add it, kind of be constantly adding biotin. What does break glyphosate bonds is apple cider vinegar and kombucha. So I usually have people doing that. You can buy it as a pill, or you can do it as a drink. And then I do see people still have it quite high. I think, you have to work on overall detox and toxic load. And I kind of suspect there's some people who genetically don't clear glyphosate as well, just because I see such different test results for it.
Yeah.
So it's tough because it's so ubiquitous. But yeah, do the apple cider vinegar. We have an article on it, or kombucha, or just it's bad for your teeth over time. So if you want to do the capsules, Paleo Valley makes some capsules for it. Be interesting to see if there's been any before and after testing.
Yeah.
Those products.
I know too. I don't think this was human research, but it's worthwhile. When I was at the Environmental Health Symposium a couple years ago, they had this guy come in who has done a lot of research on glyphosate specifically. They flew him in from France, and it was so funny seeing the doctors like crush on this celebrity guy. But one of the things I remember from his presentation was that aromatic compounds from aromatic herbs, if I remember correctly, things like oregano and thyme did have some effect on lowering glyphosate. I don't remember how exactly they did the studies. I think it might have been mouse or rat models, but I remember him going on and saying that glyphosate is kind of like, gasoline or petrol, and you need something aromatic, a compound that's aromatic to break that down, and that the aromatics are really effective for that.
Oh, interesting.
So if nothing else, incorporate these herbs into your diet.
Yeah, I mean, they're good for you. Yeah, herbs are so interesting because they do so many different things. Well, there's some questions in the Q&A. Kirsten asked what probiotic you would recommend.
Oh, that's a really fun question because I cannot answer it. What I've observed is that it depends on the person. And I don't think we have enough information, like as a human species, to say without a shadow of a doubt, yes, everybody take this one. So what I do, I joke, years ago, I took my frontal lobe out of the equation. I said, I'm not going to try to pick anymore because I apparently stink at it despite reading a lot of research. So what I've done is I take one bottle of each probiotic that I carry, I break it open, and I put 2 capsules of each in a little Ziploc baggie. And when we get to the point where we're talking about probiotics with a patient, I send them home with little Ziploc baggies of about 15 probiotics, and I tell them, have at it. You tell me which one you like. And I started it just because I wanted to weed out the ones that people hated. I was sick of selling somebody a bottle of probiotics that I thought would be good for them, that my smarty pants brain thought, and then having an email in my inbox 2 days later saying, I had diarrhea, I can't take this ever again, I hate this probiotic. And that's just what happens when you work with IBS and IBD a lot and SIBO, is you get those emails. So I just wanted to weed out those cases initially. And I figured, if you're going to hate a probiotic, you're going to tell me within 2 days. So let's just do a screening first. And then I could pick from the remaining few. But what ended up happening was when I do this with about 15 probiotics, usually there's 0, 1, or 2 that people feel worse on in the span of 2 days. So we just go, all right, not for you. But oftentimes there's 1 or 2 or 3 that people say were really promising in the span of 2 days, which is amazing.
Great.
And they'll report back and say, hey, I had perfect poops on this one. I had virtually no bloating on this one. And then we continue it. And then that seems to work out well. So that's how I do it.
Yeah, because there's so many different strains, and right, you can kind of match stuff to test results hypothetically, but I guess that people might not always like the ones.
Maybe. I tried for years and I did not get very far with that model of like, you have low lactobacilli, therefore I'm going to give you lactobacilli. I haven't found that to be super useful clinically, personally.
Okay, I think you were starting to say there's a few you like or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a few that I do like. There's one called Biogaia Gastrus. So it's Biogaia Gastrus. It comes in a drop and a chewable, and that one's pretty darn good. It has some good research on constipation, on lowering methane, and on treating H. pylori. So that one's really useful. There's other research on it too. Culturelle is useful if you have an acute GI infection. So if you have like food poisoning or traveler's diarrhea or something like that, that can be useful.
And that's pretty widely available, I think, that one, right? Okay.
So is Flora Store. Flora Store is probiotic yeast, and that should be available at most Walgreens, CVS, Amazon type places.
That's
But that's really good for yeast.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. Probably the other one that stands out in my mind is Claire Labs Factor 6. For whatever reason, a fair amount of people seem to really like that one when I do this process.
Okay, awesome. What is there any special qualities that one has?
It's a really high dose product. So it's expensive in the long run, but it is higher dose. I think it's 100 billion.
Wow.
Which is pretty high dose. They don't disclose the strains that they use. So a lot of people shy away from using Claire for that reason. I've kept it in the mix just to see, and quite a few people have ended up liking it, including a fair whack of my histamine intolerant patients. So there must be some sort of histamine modulatory effect that it has. But yeah, that probably rounds out the top 4 that I use.
Tell me the gastrus one qualities again, and I'll put them in the notes.
Yeah, so the Biogaia Gastrus has quite a bit of research on constipation in humans, lowering methane, treating H. pylori, and I forget the exact immunomodulatory or immunoboosting effects, but I typically will use it for methane, constipation, or H. pylori.
So methane is always SIBO, or it could just be just a gassy person?
Ooh, good question. No, you can have methanogen overgrowth in the colon. So it could just be a run-of-the-mill dysbiosis, or it could be SIBO.
Okay, perfect. Great. We'll get those in the YouTube replay. Triazatine Megasport. That's the only one we sell, partly because we're a little bit more retail, outlet than, so carrying a gazillion probiotics be a little tough for us. We do have that Saccharomyces boulardii. I think ours is called Restore Flora. So we've got a lot of gut products, but we only have one probiotic. When Megasport was by itself, I didn't always see amazing results. I'm really happy personally with the whole product line now and how I can use them together. They have a pre-fiber and stuff, but what's your opinion on that one?
I think they flavored one of those powders horribly, sicky sweet. But that's more of a matter of personal taste. I forget which one it is that they flavored. Tropical.
Well, there's one that has to cover, I think, the immunoglobulin flavor, so it's really flavored.
Maybe that's the one. I always forget which one it is.
Kind of get used to it, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit much. Yeah, I've dabbled a little bit. The product from their line that I use the most of is oh god, what's it called? MegaGuard, the prokinetic.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. It's used, you can use that for SIBO or H. pylori or constipation. So yeah, that was a hard one to explain, but it's a good product.
Yeah, cool. It's fit in nicely with the prokinetics I use. It's not the most common one I use by any stretch. I do the same thing. I have people try out all of the prokinetics, and then I tell them, you tell me which one you like. Cool. And I have them try it for a week at a time. So that one's not the fan favorite typically, but it is useful, and some people really, really like it. So
so when she's saying prokinetics, it helps move the digestive system along. So we talked about earlier, that could be a reason for SIBO, just the lack of movement, and then bacteria are kind of building up in there. Okay, good question.
And IBS too, even if you don't have SIBO.
Let's see. Trudy, I can't quite.
All natural. Oh, I see somebody said they need to get off Prevacid. Hold on, maybe I can get the chat up here. Yeah, what is a all-natural acid medication?
Oh, I think she's for an antacid, a natural antacid.
Yeah. It's tough because very few people genuinely need to lower their acid. Many more people need to work on the inflammation in the stomach and the sphincter that closes off the esophagus from the stomach, and also the mucus lining that should be protecting the stomach. That being said, as far as quenching symptoms in the moment, DGL licorice chews can be very helpful. Sometimes aloe, marshmallow root, sometimes they all have kind of a coating and soothing effect on the mucous membranes of the stomach and the esophagus. I have the whole video series on this on my YouTube channel. And the most recent podcast episode my friend and I recorded was on low stomach acid and GERD. So those will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, probably.
Oh, great. That's really valuable. Okay, so I put those.
5 years. Gosh.
Yeah, but those prokinetics she was talking about, Trudy, may be something to consider if you've never done those before.
Yep.
Andrea asked, I don't know if this is much as your specialty, so I can help you with that. What are ways to detox from mold?
Yeah, you go first. It's not an area of specialty per se, but I live in North Carolina and it's damp and humid and moldy here. So I've had to learn a lot more about it than I ever thought. And my mom had a pretty bad molding 2 years ago or so. So
yeah, I have two clients there who are friends. Yeah, so we kind of have our core protocol and then kind of getting more individual. So our core protocol is binders, sauna, glutathione, electrolytes. That's but then after the body systems have been so disrupted, it will help create leaky gut, make you more susceptible to infections. So lower hormone production, increased inflammation. So just a lot of different things. So I just kind of say that's our core stuff, and then we can specialize from there. And then I love a lot of DIY detox techniques. I talk about that all the time. Dry brushing, rebounding, coffee enema, essential oils. That's really how I got better, was just daily, doing different practices. Green drinks, I think the chlorophyll is really helpful. So it's a journey. It takes time. But
good way to put it. It's a journey.
Yeah, but it can resolve. Just like, you were on such a long journey with digestion, you probably thought, oh, when am I ever gonna have a normal diet? Sometimes that's why I really encourage people to just keep looking, keep trying, because there's so many tools out there and so many root causes. And if you're not getting well, just keep looking, keep going. Not to the point where you're doctor hopping and spending $1,000 here and $5,000 there. But I would just slowly in my journey, I'm hearing about CoQ10, maybe I'll give that a try. And I would just kind of slowly try stuff like that. Because we're all, just like with your story with the probiotics, we're all different in what we respond to. So I recommend glutathione. When I take it, I don't feel anything, but I love coffee enema, which also gives me glutathione. Not everyone's going to do a coffee enema, and some people feel great on glutathione. Some people get some, detox reaction from it. So yeah, I hope that's a start.
Yeah.
Andrea, anything you want to piggyback there?
Yeah, I think the glutathione is a big one. Just start slow. I just got off a call with a patient before this call, and we were talking about even a wussy dose of glutathione gave her a pretty bad detox reaction. So we're starting her at a half of a wussy dose every other day to begin with, just to get some in her body and kind of dip our toe in the water. And then we have a strategy in place to increase that gradually. But glutathione is really, really pretty critical. Sauna is fantastic. Exercise. I mean, a lot of the stuff you touched on. What I would add, since I'm in the South, I can add this. Apparently, okra has some ability to help with mold. It's
mucilaginous and fibrous. I think I have heard that. I think it can be used as a kind of a binder too.
That was my understanding. Is it's something of a binder. It's certainly good for gut health as well. But I got to hear a guy speak. He works with Shoemaker. I forget his name, Andrew Heyman, I think. And he was utterly fantastic. A bunch of us were like groupies to him, asking him questions for an hour after that class. And I remember him mentioning okra specifically as a binder. Charcoal is also great, and it's pretty cheap. And then another thing that he told me about that I've started using a bit here and there with my mold cases is phosphatidylcholine, but he specifically recommended a product by, what is it? BodyBio. So it's all one word, BodyBio. It's called PC, I think, and you can take that, and that helps with the detox, but it's more of a long haul item. It's not something where you take it on a Tuesday and you feel great on a Wednesday.
You can feel, we use the Quicksilver one. I prefer the Quicksilver one to the BodyBio personally. And that one, maybe not the same day, but you can, if you're in a flare up, feel better in a couple days from, I love the PC for like brain stuff, especially, but if I'm in a flare up, PC, fish oil, magnesium are like my little power pack to just bring it down. Like you talked about the heartburn, it's like, we can work on the root cause, but sometimes you just gotta help yourself through, the day and that kind of a thing. So I want to move on to some of your resources, unless you had anything else to share.
Yeah, I have one more thing. I saw something pop up in the chat. Somebody asked Mark Heyman, and it wasn't him. I'm actually going to copy and paste the name. If you Google this, if you Google Andrew Heyman mold, then you'll pop him up, and he's been on some podcasts. I haven't even heard of him. Huh. Fabulous.
Cool.
Oh gosh, I have such a crush on him. Very smart. Knows mold inside out. So I look forward to hearing him speak again someday. But yeah, now you can go on to what you were going to go on to.
And there's, if you want to read this one while I'm just going to introduce your site and some of your resources, but if you have any ideas for Troy, he typed in something here. See. So, and I'll show your course here in a sec. I'll do a screen share.
That's rough. So I'll, if you want to look at that for the moment, basically he said that he was on a protocol with a naturopathic doctor, treating a bunch of different stuff. Looks like a lot of effort to kill and bind up stuff, biocidin, berberine, glutathione, GI detox. And after he finished, he had weight gain, horrible gas and heartburn, and hadn't really been experiencing those prior. I wish I could offer advice. I don't know. It's a little hard for me to say, especially not knowing what labs looked like. I know you said that you were getting treated for Lyme, gut dysbiosis, mold, toxins. It's hard to say without knowing what toxins or what the nature of your dysbiosis was. So I'm sorry. I really wish I could help you. Because that sucks.
Yeah, and what's your name, Troy, right? If you want to schedule with us a past labs review or case review, it's really pretty affordable, and we don't like waste your time. Like, we sort through what you've already done and tried, and like I said, there's always more solutions. And my coach who works with me and I both, we're always on the lookout and trying things. So even with people with complex cases, we can usually give more ideas. And sometimes people are just really sensitive to supplements, like you said with your client earlier today. And it sucks, to be so sensitive, but it doesn't necessarily mean you won't get better or you'll get better slower. It's just, you have to change the protocol and adjust. So, okay, so I'm going to show first your main site. It's gigantic. So if you would like to schedule privately, there is information here on that. Main site is Infinity Holistic Health. And then Nicole is gifting us this course called Digestion Reboot for free. And you just click here, and then I put the coupon code that you use to make it free here. So this focuses a lot on bloating, it looks like.
Yeah. Bloating, IBS, digestion more broadly.
Okay. Yeah,
get in there.
It's free, no harm. I'm a big fan of education. It sounds like you're the same, Nicole. And digestion, I didn't share my digestion story, but I had plenty of digestive issues. I was sensitive to wheat and dairy, and nobody was even really talking about it when I was sensitive. I was having a bunch of dairy as a kid, on a bunch of antibiotics, always got sinus infections, and I developed IBS. And I kind of can say it now so casually because it's just such a thing of the past. I have a very diverse diet. I don't have to take a lot of supplements. So I really think just understanding my own body through the lens of a better understanding of digestion helped me a lot. So I'm always a fan of learning, even if you feel like you've tried everything. Just little nuggets that you learn here and there can make a big difference. So thank you so much for this. This is fantastic.
Yeah, hopefully there's many good nuggets, and it these are some of the foundational things I do day to day with a lot of my patients, and it's been very helpful.
Awesome.
I also, if I may, I can share, I've got 2 YouTube links I could share as well.
Oh, sure.
I have my page where I geek out on various topics and I draw stuff on my whiteboard. And then my podcast is also on there. So if you do audio podcasts, we're on audio podcasts. If you want to see visually my face and Amy's face talking about gut health and poop, you can have that experience on YouTube. But hold on, I'll copy and
What's
paste
your
those
podcast
for you.
name?
The podcast is called IBS Freedom Podcast.
Okay.
And let's see. And then my YouTube channel is called Triangle Holistic Gut Health. I forget if you asked this question prior to the Zoom call was started recording, but
Yeah, where's the triangle?
yeah, I'm in the triangle of North Carolina. So Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill make up the triangle. So it's right in the middle of North Carolina.
Yeah, and yes, but you work online as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. Barbara, when I say change protocol, if people are sensitive, it can mean like microdosing. It can mean sometimes I go to almost no supplements and doing more body therapies, which there are a lot of that you can utilize. So, you know, that I think that's an underexplored section of natural medicine. We can, one of our faults, I'll admit some of our faults, is giving just tons of supplements all the time. And then you go back and you get more supplements. So that can be a really annoying roller coaster to be on. So yeah, keeping in mind that there, you know, you can do hydrotherapy, or you can do 5 minutes of red light, or whatever people can tolerate if they're very sensitive. So awesome. Any last thoughts, Nicole?
I don't think so. I think, just to sound like a broken record, diversity is really the key to good gut health. Above everything else, above the fancy schmancy supplements, above the probiotics, a diverse array specifically of plant foods. Like if you go out of your way to eat a diverse array of meats, that's probably not quite as beneficial.
Yeah,
like
I
honestly,
hate ham and then bacon.
yeah, like that's, you know, limited usefulness. But if you go out of your way to eat, I'll use an example. My Uncle Paul eats vegetables, but only carrots, nothing else, nothing green, no nothing. So theoretically, my Uncle Paul could eat 30 servings of vegetables in a week, but if he ate 30 servings of carrots, he's only going to feed the bacteria that like carrots. The poor bacteria that appreciate broccoli are going to starve to death, and the carrot eaters are going to be there in abundance. So if you want a diverse, healthy, non-inflamed body and microbiome, feed your gut a little bit of everything. And if you ever get to a point where you feel like you're bored with your diet, your microbes got bored a long time ago. They're way more ADHD than we are.
Yeah, and Dr. Karazian emphasizes that, as does Karen Christian. Dr. Karazian talks about like chopping up a bunch of 15 vegetables, putting them in the freezer, putting some in your smoothie, so then you're getting like 15 little bits of vegetables. Dr. Karazian, Karen Christian talks about going in the Asian market and buying, you know, things that you've never tried before. I think you can also go to your farmer's market. You know, they'll have things that you haven't eaten before and things that are local and seasoned. So yeah, it's a great tip. And if you're kind of a picky eater or what have you, and like you said, or if you're sensitive, you don't have to have a huge serving. You can just have a couple bites or whatever, and you're still getting some new fibers and new foods. So it's pretty cool.
And just try new things. Like, you know, we all have Amazon, right? So once a month, go on Amazon, find something new. Even like this, I have snacks in my office. So like I found these golden berries, just little dried, wizzled up berries. No sugar added.
You're like, what are these?
Are so good. And I have like a 2-pound sack of the things. Fabulous. So, you know, every couple of days I'll have a couple of those. I've got like dried mulberries. I've got weird stuff in here because like once a month I just go on Natural Partners, or I go on Emerson or Amazon or something, and I just buy something weird and try it out.
I love that tip. Maybe that's one thing I did get from Chinese medicine school, was some weird stuff. You know, it reminds me of goji berries, which I would like steal from the medicinary because they're really delicious.
Oh, if you have that background, you for sure have eaten weirder things than I. I remember I my roommates in school were going through their acupuncture program. And I remember one time they had left something on the stovetop. And I thought, oh, they're going to burn the house down. I'd better check on that. And I lifted up the lid and it was dead bug bodies.
Oh,
Like it looked like the exoskeletons of cockroaches. I went and asked, what the heck are you cooking? And they told me it was some Chinese herb. I don't know. It was some sort of Chinese herbal something. And they're like, oh, it's the something or other for my something or other deficiency. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah, there's some real weird stuff. And when we were students, like with our sensibility, we're just like, we don't want to eat pig's feet or cow, chicken feet or whatever. But now I think having a better understanding again about diversity and various parts of the animal and collagen, like now I have a better understanding of why that has value. Whereas before it was just like, you should because, we say so, and we were like,
No,
but
thanks.
now I understand it better, and I'm more adventurous. So, well, Nicole, it was a real pleasure. Yeah, you're such great expertise, and I'm glad we have you to refer to for some of your specialties. And let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.
Hopefully, discussion was helpful, and hopefully people get a lot out of Digestion Reboot.
Yeah, tell us how it goes. Yeah, thanks for people who attended live and asked questions. Makes it a lot more interesting. I'm just going to quickly tell you what's coming up next week, which is kombucha. We're going to do a kombucha demonstration with Hannah Crump. So I'm going to have her show us around her kitchen. So that's going to be a fun one. Great. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks to everybody. And we appreciate you. Bye.
Bye.